Prue Leith, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, it's rather exciting. I'd quite like to be Prime Minister for a day.
And I can see you're talking to me from home. Is it in the Cotswolds that you are at the moment? How have you found the pandemic so far? How have you coped during the pandemic so far?
Well, I have to confess, I've had a lovely time. I mean, first of all, I had quite a few weeks of lockdown, which was bliss, and I actually just got to remember why we'd bought a lovely house in the country. And had time to walk the dogs and all the rest of it. And then we started filming Bake Off, and that was in a kind of safe bubble. And I felt amazingly safe because the precautions were fantastic, and you couldn't get in and you couldn't get out. But there were 150 of us locked down in Essex, and because it was so safe and we were tested every day and so on, we just filmed it as normal. And so when you see it, it doesn't, there's nobody. We didn't have to social distance or wear masks or anything.
What was the atmosphere like? Because it's quite strange to be locked up, isn't it, with the same 150 people for all of those weeks?
I know, but it was rather fun, I thought it would be dreadful. But it was absolutely terrific. I mean, I thought being locked down with Matt and Matt and Noel and Paul Hollywood for 7 weeks would be, like not one of them is a real grown-up. But I thought it would be, but in fact it was terrific. It was like a butler's holiday camp. We all had a lot of fun. We even played bingo one night with Matt, calling the numbers.
Okay, well, look, you're on the podcast today, not as a judge on the Bake Off, but as Prime Minister. We are promoting you to Downing Street, and we always like to get our guests settled into number 10 to begin with. So, firstly, what do you think is the personal item that you would take into number 10 with you as Prime Minister?
Apart from the family, you mean? I'd certainly take our dogs. I'm not quite sure. We'd have to go walking every morning in the park. But there's a big garden in number 10. So maybe I'll take my gardening kit because I really like gardening, and they have a rather nice garden, but I would love to improve it.
And what do you think is the drink that you'd pour yourself when you're sitting down to work through your red box of an evening? What would you reach for?
What would I reach for? You mean by way of comfort?
Yeah, which drink would you, when you're trying to...
Mostly I'd have a glass of red wine. If I was really tired, I'd have a shot of scotch. It wouldn't be a cup of tea.
Who do you think is the first person that you'd call?
I think probably my son, Danny Kruger, who is an MP. He's an MP for Devizes. And he's probably the most liberal, sensible, calm, lovely guy. He should be Prime Minister, not me.
There you are. You can run his campaign now to be Prime Minister. Well, let's talk about your path to power now and about you being Prime Minister. And this is just a very quick summary of your life, but you've had the most extraordinary career. You were born in South Africa, where your father worked in the production of dynamite for the mining industry, and your mother was an actress. After school, you moved to London to attend the Cordon Bleu Cookery School before starting your own business in catering, which grew to become Leith's Good Food. You opened your first restaurant in 1969, founded your own cookery school. You've written countless cookery books as well as novels, and you've set up a charity to promote cooking in schools, as well as in 2017 becoming a judge on the Bake Off after various other roles on television. So that is a very condensed summary of your incredible career. Now, of course, you're also Prime Minister, Prue, and everyone wants to know more about your background. What would you tell people has been the secret to your success, do you think?
Well, first of all, I have done a lot of things, but that's mostly because I've lived a very long time, so I've had time to do them. And also because I've got a lot of energy and I've always been pretty healthy. So I think if you're healthy and energetic, you can achieve quite a lot. And I've been lucky too. I've mostly done exactly what interested me and mostly succeeded. I mean, I have had failures, but by and large, I've done okay.
And you've also advised the government on things like food in schools. Do you have a strong sense of your own politics?
Well, yes. I mean, there have been occasions when I've sort of wished I'd gone into politics, but then I get close to politicians and realize just what a horrific job it is. I mean, everybody thinks you're in it for the glory. Nobody believes you're there because you want to actually do some good for the country, or few people do. And I don't think there's a politician in the world. Well, no, that's not true. I don't think there are very many politicians in England or in the UK who joined for other reasons other than wanting to do good. It's not particularly well paid. It's very long hours. You're bound to get a lot of flack. I think it's a noble profession and more great people should do it. Unfortunately, I've had such a good time doing other things that I have never got stuck into politics, only on the fringes, like lobbying and trying to help in quangos and committees and things.
Did you ever wonder then about becoming an MP? Did you ever sort of seriously consider it?
Not really. I mean, I've often sort of thought, I wish I'd gone into politics, but there was no point at which in my life I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll join the local council and work my way up. And, you know, I'm just too impatient. I would like to just be like you have appointed me Prime Minister, just like that. That's what I'd like. I don't want to go through all the hard hassle to get there.
And as you say, your son, Danny Kruger, might do it for you anyway and might become Prime Minister one day because he is a Conservative MP. Is that political streak inherited from you, do you think?
No, but I think some of the... he spent 10 years running a very good charity, which was about rehabilitation and helping ex-offenders and prisoners. And he spent 10 years doing that, and I've always been very, very proud of that. And I think perhaps because I had always been involved in charity of some sort or other along with my work, that maybe he picked up one or two things, but I think mainly it was his own interest and his wife, who was already working in prisons when he met her. So, but I'd like to think I had some influence in both. My children do a lot of charitable stuff and pro bono stuff, so I'm proud of them.
Was politics something that you discussed as a household?
Pretty well. We don't. We tend to agree with each other. I think my daughter is more to the left than I am. I'm a sort of woolly liberal in the middle. You know, I've voted Tory occasionally. I've now voted twice Tory, but I mostly voted all my life for the Liberal Democrats or the whatever party seemed to me to have the right. Basically, I would have stuck with the Liberal Party if they hadn't changed. So, and I have voted Labour too. So I'm a classic floating voter. Daniel is definitely Tory, although he started off when he was at university flirting with other parties. And my daughter is much more left wing than either of us, I think.
Okay, so I'm not really sure which party you're going to belong to as Prime Minister, but maybe you'll just be an independent Prime Minister.
Yes, I mean, yes, yeah. I would really have liked to get into the House of Lords as a crossbencher. That would have been great. But, it didn't happen, and I'm too old now, so...
Now, as Prime Minister, you can, of course, do anything that you like. And you have founded the charity Focus on Food, which promotes cookery on the curriculum. So I'm guessing that is going to be one of your priorities as Prime Minister. What do you think is the first thing that you would want to change in that regard?
Well, to be honest, I think the current government is thinking about food a lot because, COVID has helped focus minds. And before that, it had become apparent that we have a real food crisis in this country. We eat really badly, worse than the rest of Europe. We have more obese people. We have a lot of unnecessary operations in hospital, everything from diabetes causes a lot of problems. And I think the government has woken up to the fact that we need to do something about food. And at the moment, they've got a national food strategy that Henry Dimbleby has produced the first part of that. And that's looking at food right across the board, farming, imports, export, health, and so on. And then there's I've just helped complete the government strategy on review on hospital food, which is unbelievably important to get hospital food right. It seems absolutely crazy that people are not well fed in hospital, and so that the aim of that is to get particularly the medical profession believing, as I think most of them do, that food is medicine, that good food would help. And then there's been, since Boris had COVID, he's got very interested in the obesity crisis. So there's an obesity strategy going on. So all three of these things agree that the answer is to, one of the answers certainly is that we have to teach people to eat well. And that sounds rather patronizing. But the fact is, if children don't learn to love healthy food, they will never eat it. They have to like it to eat it. And you get to like stuff when you're very young. So I would put an enormous amount of money and effort into training children to eat well.
Do you think there's a contradiction these days, though? Do you worry that because of the massive popularity of baking shows, for example, and we've seen how flour sales soar during Bake Off and people go home and make lots of cakes, there's sort of mixed messaging around obesity a little bit?
Well, you'd think that, but actually, if you look at most bakers, first of all, very few bakers are seriously obese, a few are. Most people who bake, I notice it a lot in the tent, don't eat a lot of cake. They love baking and they love giving people things, but because they bake doesn't mean that they have cake every day. And I think the great thing about baking is it brings people into cooking. I don't think there's a way to make people really love good food if they're not interested in food. And the best way to interest people in food is by teaching them how to cook. Baking is a way into cooking, which is, you might say, well, that's just my justification, which there might be something of that. But I think Bake Off is really good for the nation. I think it emphasizes the home life. It's about sitting around and having food together. And we need it. I mean, we've had a long, difficult lockdown. Everybody needs Bake Off.
And talking about lockdown, I know another thing that you care a lot about is dignity in death. And that has been really topical during the pandemic because lots of people at the end of their lives haven't had the death that perhaps they would have liked to. Maybe they can't see their family members because of the risk of spreading COVID-19. Do you think that this pandemic has sort of heightened our understanding of what a good death looks like?
I think, yes. I think that it has made us all face the fact that we will die. And I'm really keen that it just seems to me quite wrong that it's perfectly legal to take your own life. You can commit suicide if you want to. But if I help you in any way, if you are terminally ill, you're in tremendous pain, you cannot get enough pain relief for your life to be bearable, and you just want to end it, and all your family agrees with you, and that's what you. Why are you not allowed to get a bit of help to do it? I mean, you might not be able to get to the means to end your life. So you need a doctor or two doctors to agree. The Dignity of Dying it's a really good charity. It really, their whole thing is that we're not talking about people who are mentally unstable because they might recover and then have a wonderful life. We're talking about people who are already dying. They should not be. What happens now, and nobody likes to talk about this, and hospitals keep it a big secret, but a lot of people die in excruciating pain because they cannot have enough morphine. And the reason they don't get enough morphine is very often that doctors don't want to be accused of murder or manslaughter. And although it's perfectly legal for them to give enough morphine to relieve the pain, there's a chance that maybe some nurse or some hospital worker will belong to some organization like Prue Leith and be really opposed to the idea of assisted death, as they would see it. And so they get reported. Now, even if they've done nothing illegal, which they haven't done anything illegal, they will be suspended for 6 months while they're examined. Well, if you're a consultant You cannot be suspended for suspected manslaughter and your career recover. So rather than do that, they just don't give the patients enough morphine. I mean, I know this from personal experience because my brother died in hospital. He had bone cancer. Bone cancer is unbelievably painful. If you cough, you can break a rib. And, we all know how sore rib. Anyway, he was in agony and they would give him morphine every 4 hours. For 3 hours, he was absolutely fine. And you could talk to him and he was joking. And if he could have gone on with that all the time, he would have had a good death. But for 1 hour in every 4, he was in utter agony, really crying, begging for relief, sometimes screaming. And the doctors wouldn't do anything about it. And when I said to them, why can't you give him more morphine? They said, well, it's very addictive. He's dying. He's going to be dead in 3 weeks. In fact, he was dead in about 5 weeks. But he should have been allowed to die. And, the people say, oh, but they can go to Dignitas. Well, it costs £10,000 to go to Dignitas. And who wants to go? And you have to be well enough to travel, which means that you're probably dying earlier than you need to. You go, you have to do this in secret. Your family shouldn't go with you because they will be committing a criminal offence if they assist you to die, although it's legal for you to die. So you have to go early enough when you're still probably enjoying some of your life and go to some sort of outpost of in Switzerland, I think, outside Geneva, in some kind of industrial park where, there's who wants to die like that? People want to die at home. Most people want to die at home with their family around them. And the law at the moment is forcing people to either commit suicide, which is horrible, and they have to do that alone, of course, and sometimes it doesn't work, or they have to suffer. And when you're in hospital for a lot of problems, doctors and paramedics, their job is to keep you alive, and you can't blame them. But what they do is you get pneumonia, say, so they give you antibiotics. You get a bit better, so they let you out of hospital. You get worse, you go back into hospital, you get pneumonia, you get more antibiotics. And in the end, my brother got pneumonia at home, refused to go back to hospital because he knew they'd just give him antibiotics. And so he refused to take any. And he died of pneumonia in the end. And that is a horrible death too, because you drown in your own phlegm. I mean, you just can't breathe because your face, all your nasal passages and your throat and everything else is full of phlegm. And that's a terrible way to die. I mean, my sister-in-law has never recovered from that. She still has nightmares about the fact that she would be sitting there thinking, oh, please, please just die. Please just die. And his daughter, my niece, said she was with him. One of us was with him all the time. And she was sitting with him one day and he was sleeping and she had a pillow in her hands and she thought, I just should suffocate him. It would help him and it would help all of us. And she sat there trying to get the courage up to kill her own father, which she couldn't do and she didn't do, but she wished she had. Isn't that awful? Why should we do that?
Yeah, it is absolutely dreadful. So legalising euthanasia would be top of your priority list. More cooking in schools would be another big priority. As Prime Minister, of course, not everything that comes across your desk will be perfectly planned. The events often overtake the best manifesto intentions. And we are in the middle of COVID-19 at the moment, which the Prime Minister is having to grapple with.
I feel so sorry for him. I resign immediately.
You resign if there's a pandemic.
I'm resigned. Yeah, you made me Prime Minister. I don't want to be Prime Minister in this pandemic. I think it's a terrible job. But you know what I think about that? I think that we are far too critical of as a nation, we've got really, I think it's partly to do with social media. Everybody wants to attack everything. And I'm sure that the government has got a lot wrong, and, U-turns are difficult to understand and so on. But fundamentally, what I think is that if enough of us do the best we can to, if there are enough restrictions, it doesn't really matter from a nationwide point of view if it's fair or not. I mean, it may seem very illogical that you're allowed to go to a pub, but you're not allowed to go to a family wedding or something. But ultimately, if there are enough restrictions to just prevent a huge second spike, we'll all be better off for it. So they have to do what they can. And what they can may not be perfect, but, nobody's ever done this before.
Do you think people are too critical then? People have been too critical of the government?
No, because I'm all for free speech. People should say what they want. But I think, you look at all over the world, except probably in Sweden, where they did very little. Most people are critical of their government over the handling of the pandemic, because nobody's ever done it before.
I mean, the big thing up for discussion at the moment as well is whether there will be a sort of second lockdown. And I'm just interested, with your background in the restaurant trade, how do you feel? Well, yeah, exactly. You sigh already, because of course that industry has been decimated. How do you feel about the idea of another lockdown for hospitality? I mean, do you think we can go through that again?
We may have to, and I really hope it doesn't come to that, because I do think that if the hospitality industry can at least get some money in, obviously if they're only having 40% or 20% of their normal customers, they're not going to have enough they'll still be losing money, because government's furlough scheme will have finished. But if they can just hang on in there, I think what the government should do, and I'm just not sure that this is right, but my guess is that I think if I was Prime Minister, I would want to look at trying to support the restaurants and the hotels that I believe do have a future. And that won't be all of them. I mean, if you look at the City of London, I don't think they're going to need as many hotels and restaurants as they have had in the past, because there is going to be so much more working at home. Now, how you discriminate between which is a viable business and which isn't, because probably they're all viable, or were all viable, and could all be viable, and some of them, any of them, could be viable in the future. But I'd only want them to support ones that I would only want them to support the businesses that enough of them that we will need in the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And there are calls today, for example, about the 10 p.m. curfew, saying the 10 p.m. curfew is not working because people are spilling out of pubs and restaurants all at 10 o'clock and then congregating in the street. And there are suggestions maybe to bring that curfew forward. I mean, how do you feel about that? Because that would damage the industry even more, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I think that what we should be doing is more messaging and more advice and more trying to prevent people going on and having a party in the street or in somebody's house afterwards. I don't quite know how you do that, but I think what we want is more social workers and council officials or police advising people as they leave. And it sounds awful, but it's like training people, because with young people, a few drinks inside them and they've recently come out of lockdown. Of course, they want to have a party, but it is a terribly selfish thing to do, because that is exactly how we're spreading. It's social gatherings in houses that seem to be the problem at the moment.
Would you be concerned then about locking down pubs and restaurants further? Because that's one easy solution, is just close them all again.
I would be concerned, because I do think that we have to balance the economy with the need to keep the virus in control. So, no, I would try to keep the pubs open. I would try to do it by try to change behaviour. And I think, if if you had publicans and social workers and other people willing to, just for a few weeks, be in those pubs at closing time and try to make everybody understand that it is incredibly antisocial to go on drinking in groups. I saw, is it Andy Burnham, who said that he thought that they should bring it forward to 9, the curfew to 9 p.m. I don't think that'll help. People will just drink faster and we'll still have the same problem. I think you have to do it by persuasion.
A sort of public education campaign and have people out there at closing time saying, time to go home, folks.
Yeah, because I just think that a lot of it will be just people being thoughtless. It's not that they're evil. It's just that they don't think of it. They've got a couple of drinks. Oh, well, let's just stick together. Let's go to yours, But if somebody is saying to them, by the way, please go home now, you owe it to the nation. We have to go home now. I don't know.
Okay, well, talking of closing time, we don't have much time left with you, Prue, so I need to get through some quick fire questions before we end the podcast. So just for fun, who from Bake Off would you put in the cabinet, do you think, in your cabinet?
Do you know, I think I might put Lottie. Do you know who Lottie is? Lottie is one of the bakers.
Which portfolio would you give Lottie?
I think I'd give her culture, media and sport. She's terrific.
And where would you like to go on holiday as Prime Minister? Because we often like to get pictures of the Prime Minister on holiday for the newspapers. Where would you like to be snapped?
Well, as the nation sadly knows, I turned 80 in February, and I was going to go this August and celebrate my 80th birthday, a few months late. In Scotland, I was going to go fishing on the Neva for a week and then puffing in a little boat round up the Crinan Canal and round Caledonian Canal and round the Western Isles in a little. It's the last remaining ship that used to be like a bus going around delivering to the islanders all the sort of supplies they needed. One second they'd be taking sheep, and the next second they'd be taking coal, or children to school, or people moving house. And now the last remaining one, which is called the Puffer, it has been fitted out to take 10 people. So I was going to take 10 friends fishing and then another 10 friends puffing. And I couldn't do either. And so that's where I'd like to be on holiday, but I'm not.
Hopefully it's a good plan for next year, all laid out and all the ideas already put together. And lastly, I mean, you've mentioned that you've got a couple of dogs. What would your Downing Street pet be? Presumably the dogs.
Well, we've got a couple of Cavalier Spaniels, and I had never thought I'd like spaniels, little spaniels, because I thought they were lap dogs, and silly old ladies' dogs. But now I'm an old lady, I see the absolute point. These dogs, I've got 2 of them, and I had them on lockdown with me, and they were great. We'd go for long walks. When we got home and I went back to work a bit, they couldn't understand why they couldn't go for an hour's walk every morning. So I'm devoted to them. They're called Tatty and Teasel.
Tatty and Teasel.
I gave Tatty to John on our wedding day. And it was his wedding present. So Tatty is really his dog.
Okay.
But I keep telling him she loves me best,
So Tatty and Teasel will be a Prime Minister's best friends if you were in Downing Street. Prue Leith, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Paul.